February 14th, 1968. At 2:09 a.m., a subway train carrying 73 passengers entered a tunnel beneath East Berlin. Moments later, the driver radioed, "The tunnel ahead isn't on the map." Then the signal vanished. The train should have reached the next station within 2 minutes. It never arrived. Search crews found no wreckage, no collision, no sign of an accident. 24 hours later, security forces sealed the entire area and claimed nothing had happened. But underground workers reported finding a passenger carriage at a closed station beneath the city. Its lights were still on. Newspapers lay open, coffee remained warm, and every watch inside had stopped at exactly 2:13 a.m. What happened beneath Berlin that night remains one of the city's darkest forgotten mysteries. February 14th, 1968. East Berlin slept beneath a blanket of freezing fog. The Berlin Wall had divided the city for nearly 7 years, turning streets, railway lines, and entire neighborhoods into heavily controlled border zones. Above ground, armed guards patrolled checkpoints. Below ground, a different world existed. A maze of subway tunnels, abandoned wartime bunkers, maintenance corridors, and sealed stations stretched beneath the city. Most citizens never thought about what lay below their feet. That changed during the early hours of February 14th. At 1:56 a.m., Metro Line G departed Alexanderplatz, carrying 73 passengers and 4 railway employees. The train was one of the final services of the night. Most passengers were factory workers, hospital staff, and government employees returning home. Inside the carriages, the atmosphere was quiet. Several passengers slept. Others read newspapers beneath fluorescent lights. A few stared silently through dark windows reflecting their own faces. The train's driver was Carl Weiss, a veteran operator with 17 years of experience. Nothing unusual appeared in the maintenance reports. Nothing suggested the journey would become one of East Germany's strangest unsolved disappearances. At approximately 2:09 a.m., the train entered a tunnel section beneath the Mitte district. The route passed close to several so-called ghost stations, abandoned subway platforms, sealed after construction of the Berlin Wall. These stations remained dark and inaccessible. Armed border guards occasionally patrolled them. Ordinary passengers were never allowed inside. As the train approached one of these sections, dispatchers received a radio transmission from Weiss. At first, his voice sounded normal. Then something changed. According to surviving records, Weiss said, "There is another signal ahead." Several seconds passed. Then he added, "The tunnel ahead isn't on the map." Those were his final words. The transmission ended abruptly. The train never reached the next station. Dispatchers initially assumed radio interference. Underground communication failures were common. But after 5 minutes without contact, concern began growing. At 2:18 a.m., railway supervisors attempted to contact the train. No response. At 2:24 a.m., emergency inspection teams entered the tunnel network. What they found made no sense. The tracks were empty, no train, no wreckage, no debris. The rails continued normally through every inspected tunnel section. Switches remained locked in their expected positions. There was nowhere for the train to go, yet it had vanished. By sunrise, officials from the Ministry of Transport and the Stasi secret police had taken control of the investigation. Entire sections of the metro system were closed. Workers arriving for morning shifts were turned away without explanation. Security officers confiscated maintenance logs and radio recordings. Employees were warned not to discuss the incident. Officially, no accident had occurred. Unofficially, panic was spreading underground. Late that evening, several maintenance workers reported something extraordinary. At an abandoned station beneath central Berlin, a single metro carriage had appeared on a disused track. The station had been closed since construction of the Berlin Wall. No active rail line connected to it. Yet there it was, a passenger carriage from Metro Line G. Investigators entering the car found no passengers, no driver, no bodies. The interior looked as though everyone had vanished mid-journey. Newspapers remained open on seats. Coats hung neatly from hooks. Half-finished cigarettes rested in ashtrays. A thermos of coffee was still warm. Most disturbing of all were the watches. Every wristwatch recovered from the carriage had stopped at exactly 2:13 a.m. The carriage was removed before sunrise. Its existence was never publicly acknowledged. Within days, rumors began circulating among railway employees. Several workers claimed they had seen unfamiliar construction crews operating deep beneath the city during previous months. The crews worked at night. Most wore military uniforms rather than railway clothing. Their equipment disappeared before dawn. When workers asked questions, they were told the projects involved telecommunications infrastructure. Few believed the explanation. As investigators searched deeper into the tunnel network, they discovered discrepancies in official maps. Several maintenance corridors shown on wartime blueprints no longer appeared on modern records. Entire sections of underground infrastructure seemed to have vanished from documentation. One retired engineer privately claimed that beneath East Berlin existed an older transportation system constructed during World War II. According to his account, emergency rail tunnels connected military facilities, bunkers, and supply depots throughout the city. Most were supposedly sealed after the war, but nobody could verify whether every tunnel had truly been closed. The Stasi quickly dismissed such theories. Still, the investigation continued behind closed doors. Months later, a railway electrician named Dieter Vogel made a confidential statement. While inspecting power cables near a sealed service shaft, Vogel claimed he heard sounds deep underground. Not echoes, not machinery, a train. He described hearing wheels moving slowly across rails somewhere far below the city. Others reported similar experiences. Some heard distant station announcements. Others claimed to see lights moving through sealed tunnel walls. None of these reports appeared in official documents. By late 1968, the case effectively disappeared. Families of the missing passengers received almost no information. Some were informed that records of their relatives' journeys could not be confirmed. Others claimed government officials pressured them to stop asking questions. The missing train itself was removed from public discussion. For decades, the incident remained buried beneath layers of secrecy. Then, after German reunification, fragments of new information emerged. In 1997, a former Stasi officer gave an anonymous interview to a journalist in Berlin. He claimed investigators had discovered evidence of a hidden underground transportation network extending beneath both East and West Berlin. According to him, several tunnels were unknown even to most government agencies. Some dated back to wartime construction projects. Others had been expanded during the Cold War. The former officer alleged that the missing train may have been diverted accidentally into one of these forgotten routes during secret engineering work beneath the city. He provided no documents, no evidence, only his testimony. Researchers later attempted to verify the claim, but encountered missing archives, destroyed blueprints, and heavily censored records. To this day, no official explanation has ever been released. The most accepted theory among modern investigators is both simple and unsettling. During secret underground construction near the Berlin Wall, workers may have opened access to a forgotten tunnel system beneath the city. A signaling failure could have diverted Metro Line G onto an undocumented section of track. A collapse, flooding event, or secondary accident may then have sealed the route completely. If that theory is correct, the missing train could still remain somewhere beneath Berlin today, hidden behind concrete walls, buried beneath decades of construction, forgotten beneath one of the most heavily monitored cities of the Cold War. And somewhere beneath the streets of modern Berlin, a tunnel that never appeared on any map may still exist. October 22nd, 1957. A night mail train carrying 58 passengers, railway guards, and thousands of letters entered Montana's remote Devil's Pass. At 11:43 p.m., the engineer radioed a message that made no sense. The signal ahead is green, but there's no track there. Seconds later, the transmission ended. The train never arrived. 24 hours later, search crews found the locomotive. Its engine was cold, its lights were off, and it was standing on a dead-end spur beneath a cliff where no passenger train could possibly have reached. The passenger cars were gone. All 58 passengers had vanished, and along the locomotive's steel body ran deep scratches, as if something had dragged the entire train through a tunnel that did not exist on any map. What happened at Devil's Pass remains one of Montana's most terrifying, forgotten railway mysteries. October 22nd, 1957. Autumn had arrived early in the mountains of western Montana. Cold winds swept across the forests. Snow already covered the highest peaks surrounding Devil's Pass. The region was famous among railroad workers, not because of its beauty, because of its reputation. For decades, engineers spoke quietly about strange events near the pass. Signal failures, unexplained lights, voices heard over radios long after stations had closed. Most dismissed the stories as superstition. Railroad men were known for exaggeration. Yet few enjoyed operating trains through Devil's Pass after dark. The westbound mail train, number 17, departed Missoula at 8:12 p.m. The consist was modest: a diesel locomotive, a baggage car, a United States Railway Post Office mail car, 2 passenger coaches, and a security carriage carrying armed railway guards responsible for protecting government mail. In total, 58 passengers and crew traveled aboard the train. Most were ordinary people, businessmen returning home, college students, traveling families, railway employees riding between assignments. Several passengers were veterans of World War II. One was a state judge traveling to Helena. Another was a postal inspector escorting registered government documents. Nothing about the passenger list seemed unusual. The locomotive was operated by engineer Frank Mallory, age 52, 28 years of railway experience. Mallory knew the route better than almost anyone. He had crossed Devil's Pass hundreds of times. If anyone could navigate the mountains safely, it was him. At approximately 11:30 p.m., train number 17 approached the eastern side of the pass. Weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. Dense fog rolled through the valleys. Visibility dropped. Dispatchers noticed intermittent interference on railway communications. At first, nobody worried. Such problems were common in mountainous terrain. Then, 13 minutes later, engineer Mallory transmitted his final message. The recording survives only through dispatcher notes. According to those notes, Mallory sounded confused, not frightened, confused. His exact words were, "The signal ahead is green, but there's no track there." Several seconds passed. Then another voice was heard in the cab. Investigators never identified the speaker. The transmission ended abruptly. No distress call followed. No emergency brake activation. No collision report. Nothing. Train number 17 simply disappeared. Dispatchers repeatedly attempted radio contact. No response. The train never checked in at the next signal station. At midnight, concern began spreading through the regional control office. By 12:40 a.m., railway authorities officially declared the train overdue. Search operations began shortly afterward. Nobody suspected they were about to encounter one of the strangest railway mysteries in American history. The first search train departed shortly after 1:15 a.m. Railway officials initially expected a simple explanation. Perhaps a mechanical failure. Perhaps a landslide. Perhaps a derailment hidden somewhere within the fog-covered mountains. None of those explanations survived the morning. At sunrise, search crews reached the final section of railway before Devil's Pass. The main line remained completely clear. No damaged track. No signs of collision. No evidence that train number 17 had left the rails. For nearly 12 hours, investigators followed the route mile by mile. Nothing. Then, shortly after 3 p.m., a forestry ranger reported something unusual. He had seen a locomotive resting beneath a cliff several miles north of the railway corridor. The location made no sense. No active railway existed there. Officials assumed the report was mistaken. Nevertheless, a search team was dispatched. When they arrived, experienced railway investigators stood speechless. The locomotive from train number 17 sat quietly on a short section of track beneath a towering rock face. The engine number matched immediately. It was the missing locomotive. There was no doubt. Yet the location was impossible. The rails beneath the locomotive formed a dead-end spur barely 200 yards long. The track ended directly against a cliff. Beyond it stood solid rock. No tunnel, no continuation, no junction connecting it to the main railway. Nothing. Investigators examined maps repeatedly. According to every official railway document, the spur had been abandoned in 1932. Most railway employees didn't even know it existed. The line had originally served a small mining operation that closed before World War II. Large sections of track had supposedly been removed decades earlier. Yet somehow the locomotive had appeared there. The mystery deepened as crews inspected the engine. There was no major damage, no derailment scars, no signs of collision. The diesel fuel tanks still contained fuel. Mechanical systems appeared functional. The brakes worked normally. Even stranger, the locomotive sat perfectly centered on the rails, as though it had arrived under its own power. Inside the cab, investigators found engineer Frank Mallory's coffee cup, still sitting beside the controls. His notebook remained open. A flashlight rested on the floor. But there was no sign of Mallory, no sign of the fireman, no sign of anyone. The locomotive was completely empty. Search teams then noticed something disturbing. Long gouges covered both sides of the engine. Deep scratches ran across the steel panels. Some measured several feet in length. The marks appeared fresh. Bright metal showed through the damaged paint. Investigators initially suspected tree branches. That theory was quickly dismissed. The scratches were too deep, too uniform, too parallel. According to one railway engineer, the damage resembled abrasion caused by passing through an extremely narrow concrete structure, almost like a tunnel. But no tunnel existed anywhere near the abandoned spur. The nearest tunnel lay more than 20 miles away. As darkness returned to the mountains, crews searched the surrounding area. No passenger coaches could be found. No mail car, no baggage car, no security carriage. Nothing. It was as if the rest of the train had been separated from the locomotive and erased entirely. Then investigators discovered something even stranger. Several feet behind the locomotive, embedded in damp soil beside the track, lay fragments of broken concrete. The pieces appeared freshly cracked, yet no concrete structures existed nearby. One fragment contained rusted steel reinforcement bars. Another showed traces of old industrial paint. Engineers could not explain where the debris had originated. That night, railway officials established a temporary command center near the abandoned spur. The search expanded dramatically. Aircraft joined the operation. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forests. Military helicopters flew reconnaissance missions over the mountains. Yet, despite one of the largest search efforts in Montana history, not a single passenger car was found. And then, on the second night of the investigation, a radio operator received a transmission that would haunt the case forever. The signal lasted less than 7 seconds. The voice was weak, distorted, barely recognizable. But multiple witnesses later agreed on what they heard. A man quietly said, "There's another train here." Then the transmission ended. No source was ever identified. The mysterious radio transmission changed everything. Until that moment, investigators believed they were dealing with an unusual railway accident. Now they faced a far stranger possibility. Someone, or something, had survived. And according to the voice heard over the radio, there was another train involved. Federal authorities soon joined the investigation. Representatives from the Interstate Commerce Commission arrived in Montana alongside railway engineers and communications specialists. Their first task was to determine where the mysterious transmission originated. The results made little sense. Signal triangulation suggested the source came from somewhere beneath Devil's Pass itself. Not near the abandoned spur, not near the main line, beneath the mountain. At first, investigators blamed equipment malfunction. But 3 independent analyses reached the same conclusion. The transmission had originated underground. The discovery triggered a review of historical records connected to Devil's Pass. Archivists searched railway blueprints dating back decades. Most documents revealed nothing unusual. Then, a researcher uncovered a collection of engineering maps from 1911. The maps referenced a project known only as Tunnel Project D. No further description was attached. No construction reports survived. No completion records existed. Yet multiple documents clearly showed a planned tunnel running directly beneath the mountain. Curiously, later editions of the maps omitted the tunnel entirely. It was as if the project had been erased. Investigators became increasingly interested. Had the tunnel been built? If so, why was it missing from modern records? A week later, search teams discovered another clue. Less than 2 miles from the abandoned spur stood the remains of an old mining settlement. The settlement had been abandoned since the 1920s. Most buildings had collapsed. Only stone foundations remained. While surveying the area, workers found a partially buried steel door protruding from the hillside. Snow and debris concealed much of the structure. The door appeared industrial, heavy, far too large for an ordinary mine entrance. Railway engineers examined the site carefully. Stamped into the rusted metal were several faded letters. D, P, T. Nobody knew what the initials meant. Using cutting equipment, crews eventually forced the door open. A cold gust of air rushed outward. The passage beyond descended into darkness. Inside, investigators discovered a tunnel reinforced with concrete and steel supports. The structure looked remarkably similar to railway construction. Yet there were no tracks. At least, not at first. The corridor extended nearly half a mile underground before ending at a massive cave-in. Rock and debris completely blocked further access. Search teams initially assumed the tunnel had been abandoned during construction. Then they found something unexpected. Embedded beneath layers of dust near the collapse were steel rails, old rails. Railway gauge measurements matched those used by the Montana Northern Railroad during the early 20th century. Someone had once intended trains to travel through this passage. The question was, why? Further examination revealed even stranger details. Several sections of the tunnel walls displayed fresh scrape marks. The damage looked recent, very recent. Engineers compared measurements with scratches found on the missing locomotive. The dimensions matched almost perfectly. It appeared the locomotive had somehow traveled through a concrete tunnel narrower than standard railway clearance. Yet investigators still had no explanation for how that was possible. The tunnel beyond the cave-in remained inaccessible. Attempts to remove debris proved difficult. Every time crews cleared part of the blockage, additional rockfalls occurred. One engineer privately described the area as dangerously unstable. Another believed the collapse was unnatural. According to his report, portions of the debris appeared deliberately placed, as though someone had sealed the passage. Then came another discovery. Hidden behind a fallen support beam, workers found a rusted metal sign. Most of the lettering had deteriorated. Only a few words remained legible. Authorized Rail Traffic Level B. The sign immediately raised new questions. Level B implied the existence of other levels. Perhaps Level A. Perhaps additional underground routes. But no official records referenced such a system. Federal investigators refused to comment publicly. Newspapers began reporting rumors of secret tunnels beneath Devil's Pass. Railway officials denied everything. Yet behind closed doors, concern was growing, because another transmission had just been received. This time the signal lasted nearly 12 seconds. Static crackled across the radio. Then came the unmistakable sound of a train whistle. Not a recording, not interference, a real locomotive whistle. Followed by a man's frightened voice. 3 words. "We're still moving." The transmission originated from the same underground location, and according to experts, it was impossible. Train number 17 had disappeared more than 8 days earlier. By early November, pressure from the public was growing. Newspapers across Montana demanded answers. Families of the missing passengers wanted to know why the search had produced so few results. Behind the scenes, investigators were becoming increasingly convinced that Devil's Pass concealed something far larger than an ordinary railway accident. On November 4th, engineers finally succeeded in stabilizing part of the collapse inside the underground tunnel. For the first time, a small exploration team managed to pass beyond the debris field. What they discovered changed the investigation forever. The tunnel continued. Far beyond the point where official records suggested it should end, concrete walls stretched into darkness. Steel support beams lined the passage. Ventilation ducts ran along the ceiling. And most importantly, railway tracks extended forward beneath the mountain. Fresh railway tracks, not abandoned, not rusted, not buried. The steel appeared polished, as though trains had been using the line recently. The discovery shocked everyone involved. No government agency claimed ownership of the railway. No mining company had records of its construction. And yet, an entire underground rail system existed beneath Devil's Pass. The exploration team advanced cautiously. The passage descended deeper into the mountain. Nearly half a mile farther on, investigators found the first physical evidence connected to train number 17. A passenger suitcase. The leather was damaged but recognizable. Inside were identification documents belonging to a missing schoolteacher named Margaret Ellis. The discovery confirmed that the Underground Railway somehow connected to the vanished train. Search crews continued forward. Additional items soon appeared. A child's toy train, a railway ticket stub, fragments of luggage, a woman's winter coat hanging from a steel pipe. None of the items showed signs of long-term exposure. Most appeared to have been left there recently, as if someone had passed through the tunnel only days before. Then, investigators reached a section of track that caused immediate alarm. Deep grooves scarred the concrete walls. Metal had scraped repeatedly against both sides of the passage. Measurements matched the damage found on the recovered locomotive. At last, investigators understood what had happened. The locomotive had indeed traveled through the tunnel. The scratches were proof. But a new mystery emerged. The passage was too narrow for the full train. Several engineers concluded that the passenger cars could never have fit through certain sections without striking the walls. Yet somehow the locomotive had passed through. What had happened to the rest of the consist remained unknown. Several hundred yards farther ahead, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Floodlights illuminated the cavern. Everyone stopped. Before them stretched multiple railway lines, disappearing into darkness. Some tracks appeared active, others vanished into distant tunnels. The chamber resembled a hidden underground station. No signs identified the location. No maps referenced its existence. Dust covered most surfaces, but portions of the rails gleamed under the lights. Someone had maintained them. Recently. Investigators documented everything. Then they found something deeply disturbing. Fresh footprints crossed the station floor. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. The prints appeared only a few days old. Several sets led toward one particular tunnel on the far side of the chamber. Search teams prepared to follow them. Before they could proceed, a railway communications specialist noticed an abandoned signal box mounted on a wall nearby. The equipment still carried power, impossible as that seemed. A faint green light blinked steadily. Curious, the specialist opened the panel. Inside sat a maintenance log. Most entries were unreadable. Moisture had damaged the pages. Only one recent notation remained clearly visible. The date shocked investigators. October 22nd, 1957. The same night, train number 17 disappeared. Beneath the date appeared a single, handwritten instruction. Route cleared for inbound traffic. No signature followed, no explanation. Only those 4 words. As the team debated their next move, a distant sound echoed through the underground station. A train whistle. Long, low, and unmistakably close. Every member of the team heard it. The sound seemed to come from somewhere ahead, beyond the tunnel where the footprints disappeared. Yet, according to every known record, no train had entered Devil's Pass since the night train number 17 vanished. The whistle sounded again, this time closer, and something else accompanied it. The faint rumble of approaching wheels. The whistle echoed through the underground station a 3rd time. Closer now. Far too close. The investigation team froze. Every instinct told them the sound was impossible. No train should have existed beneath Devil's Pass. Yet the rumble of steel wheels continued to grow. Slowly, deliberately. Several investigators switched off their flashlights. The chamber fell silent. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then, the sound stopped, abruptly, as if whatever had been approaching had halted just beyond sight. The tunnel ahead remained completely dark. Lead investigator Robert Hayes ordered the team forward. The footprints provided the only clue they had. Following them, the group entered the eastern tunnel. The passage stretched for nearly a mile. At first, they found nothing, only tracks, concrete walls, old electrical cables hanging from the ceiling. Then, one of the searchers spotted something in the darkness ahead. A reflective surface. Metal. As the team advanced, powerful lanterns illuminated an enormous shape. Several investigators gasped. Passenger coaches. Train number 17. The missing passenger cars stood silently on the rails. 3 coaches, the mail car, and the security carriage, all intact, all connected. The discovery should have ended the mystery. Instead, it deepened it. The cars appeared almost untouched. No derailment damage, no signs of collision, no fire, no structural failure. The train looked ready to depart. Search teams immediately boarded the first coach. The scene inside was terrifying. Suitcases remained in overhead racks. Newspapers lay open on seats. Half-finished meals sat untouched. Reading glasses rested on tables. One deck of playing cards remained arranged in the middle of a game. Everything suggested the passengers had vanished instantly. No signs of panic appeared. No evidence of a struggle. No blood. No bodies. Nothing. The investigators moved methodically through each carriage. The results were always the same. Personal belongings everywhere. Passengers nowhere. Then they reached the mail car. Thousands of letters still filled the sorting racks. Canvas mail sacks remained stacked exactly where postal workers had left them. One sack lay torn open, its contents scattered across the floor. Several envelopes appeared damaged by moisture. Others looked brand new, as if no time had passed since the train disappeared. The final carriage proved the most disturbing, the security car. Inside, investigators found the weapons locker, locked, untouched. A logbook remained open on a desk. The final entry had been written shortly before the disappearance. It contained only one sentence. "We can see lights ahead." Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. Then came the discovery that transformed the case forever. Near the rear door of the security carriage, investigators found a camera. A government-issued camera belonging to one of the railway guards. The film inside remained undeveloped. Authorities immediately transported the camera to a laboratory. Several days later, technicians processed the photographs. The first images showed ordinary scenes aboard the train. Passengers reading newspapers, families eating dinner, conductors checking tickets. Then the final photographs appeared. Investigators examined them repeatedly. None could explain what they showed. The last images had been taken through the front window of the train. The photographs revealed another railway line running parallel to train number 17, a line that did not exist on any map. Beside it stood illuminated platforms, signal towers, buildings, an entire station. The station appeared enormous, far larger than anything that should have existed beneath Devil's Pass. Dozens of lights illuminated the structures. Several photographs even showed people standing on the platform. Yet the figures appeared blurred, indistinct, almost impossible to identify. One photograph captured a station sign. Most of the lettering was unreadable. Only 2 words remained visible. Level B. The same words investigators had found earlier on the rusted warning sign. The photographs triggered immediate federal involvement. Agents arrived from Washington. The images were classified. Copies disappeared. Official statements described the photographs as inconclusive. Few believed that explanation. Meanwhile, engineers examined the passenger coaches more closely. Near the wheels of the final carriage, they discovered something that would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the entire case. Fresh mud. Not unusual by itself, except laboratory analysis revealed the soil contained mineral compositions not found anywhere in the Devil's Pass region. The material appeared to originate from deep underground, far deeper than any known railway tunnel. Investigators now faced a terrifying possibility. Train number 17 had not merely vanished. It had traveled somewhere hidden beneath the mountains. And if the evidence was correct, someone had built an entire railway system there. The following week, authorities prepared a final expedition beyond the passenger cars. The tracks continued deeper into the darkness, toward the mysterious station shown in the photographs, toward whatever lay beyond Level B. Only a handful of investigators would ever make that journey, and according to leaked reports years later, some of them never returned. On November 18, 1957, federal authorities approved what would become the final official expedition into the underground railway system beneath Devil's Pass. The team consisted of 12 men, railway engineers, federal investigators, military communications specialists, and 2 geologists. Their objective was simple: follow the tracks beyond the recovered passenger cars, locate the station shown in the photographs, determine where train number 17 had gone. The expedition entered the tunnel shortly after dawn. Communication lines were established back to the underground chamber. For the first 2 hours, progress was routine. The rails continued deeper beneath the mountains. Ventilation shafts appeared periodically along the route. Electrical cables ran beside the tracks. Someone had invested enormous resources into constructing the network. Yet no government agency claimed responsibility. At approximately 11:17 a.m., the team reached a massive steel gate. The structure blocked the railway completely. Several faded markings remained visible. Most were unreadable. Only one line could still be identified: Authorized Access, Level B. The gate stood partially open, just enough for investigators to pass through. Beyond it, the tunnel widened dramatically. The explorers entered what appeared to be an enormous underground transportation complex. Platforms stretched into darkness. Signal towers rose from the concrete floor. Maintenance buildings lined the tracks. The entire facility resembled a hidden railway station buried beneath the mountains. And according to every official record, it should not have existed. The most disturbing discovery came moments later: electricity. The station still had power. Lights glowed faintly throughout the complex. Signal indicators remained active. Ventilation fans slowly rotated overhead. The machinery appeared old, yet functional, as if someone maintained the facility, even now. The investigators carefully searched the station. No people were found, no workers, no security personnel. Nothing. Only silence. Then they discovered a control office overlooking the platforms. Inside were hundreds of documents. Most had deteriorated beyond recognition. Several remained readable. The dates shocked everyone. Many records originated from the 1930s, others from the 1940s, some from the early 1950s. Train schedules, maintenance reports, arrival logs, departure records, all referenced rail traffic moving through Level B. Yet no such railway officially existed. One ledger proved especially important. The final entries were dated October 22, 1957. The night train number 17 disappeared. Investigators found a handwritten notation: Train 17, arrival confirmed. Platform 4, 11:51 p.m. The room fell silent. According to official records, train number 17 never reached any station after entering Devil's Pass. Yet someone had recorded its arrival 3 minutes after the engineer's final transmission. The implications were terrifying. The train had gone somewhere, and someone had been waiting for it. The deeper the team explored, the stranger the evidence became. Additional platforms extended into distant tunnels. Several tracks disappeared beyond sealed blast doors. Others descended toward lower levels of the complex. Most remained inaccessible. Then came the incident that ended the expedition. At approximately 2:43 p.m., radio communications became unstable. Investigators reported hearing voices through their equipment, not from their own team. Unknown voices, conversations, station announcements, the sounds of arriving trains. At first they assumed interference. Then one investigator reported seeing lights moving through a tunnel beyond Platform 4. Several others witnessed the same phenomenon. Moments later, a train whistle echoed through the station. The sound originated somewhere below. No train was visible. Panic spread quickly. The expedition leader ordered an immediate withdrawal. The team retreated toward the main tunnel. Most returned safely. Not all. 2 investigators never emerged. An extensive search followed. No trace of either man was ever found. Their disappearance was classified. The public never learned their names. Within days, the federal government sealed the entire complex. Explosive charges collapsed major access routes. Records were confiscated. Witnesses signed confidentiality agreements. The case effectively vanished from public view. Officially, train number 17 remained a missing railway incident. Nothing more. Years later, fragments of the investigation leaked through retired railway employees and former federal personnel. Most historians now support a theory grounded in reality. According to that theory, Devil's Pass concealed an abandoned underground transportation network originally constructed for mining operations and later expanded during wartime. Large portions of the system were forgotten after decades of secrecy. A signaling malfunction may have diverted train number 17 onto a hidden connection leading into the underground complex. The locomotive eventually emerged onto the abandoned spur where search crews found it. The passenger cars continued deeper underground. It is the most logical explanation. Yet even that theory leaves critical questions unanswered. Who maintained the station? Why did arrival records exist? Why was electricity still functioning? And most importantly, what happened to the 58 passengers? No confirmed remains have ever been recovered. No verified survivor has ever come forward. The underground station beneath Devil's Pass has never been rediscovered. Satellite surveys reveal nothing. Modern railway maps show no trace of the hidden network. The mountains keep their secrets. Occasionally, hikers exploring remote sections of Devil's Pass report hearing distant train whistles carried on the wind. Others claim they have seen unexplained lights near abandoned mining trails after midnight. Most stories are dismissed. Perhaps they should be. But one fact remains undeniable. On October 22, 1957, a train carrying 58 passengers entered Devil's Pass. 24 hours later, only the locomotive was found. And somewhere beneath the mountains of Montana, beyond forgotten tunnels, sealed platforms, and a station called Level B, the rest of train number 17 may still be waiting in the dark. January 17, 1989. A passenger train carrying 97 people entered a snow-covered tunnel deep in the Alaskan mountains. The tunnel was only 1.6 kilometers long. The train should have emerged 6 minutes later. It never did. When rescuers searched the tunnel, they found no wreckage, no derailment, and no bodies. Only empty tracks. Then investigators discovered something impossible. Fresh footprints frozen in the ice, dozens of them, leading directly into a solid concrete wall. Days later, one of the train's passenger cars was found nearly 70 miles away on a military railway, abandoned since World War II. The lights were still on, a cup of tea remained warm, and a cassette player was still playing music. To this day, no one knows what happened to the frozen Northern Star. January 17, 1989. Winter had settled heavily across central Alaska. Temperatures hovered near -30 degrees Celsius, while powerful Arctic winds swept through the Alaska range. Snowstorms had become a daily occurrence. Entire highways disappeared beneath drifting snow. Small mountain towns remained isolated for days at a time. Yet despite the dangerous weather, railway traffic continued across the state. One of the most important passenger routes was the frozen Northern Star. The overnight train connected Fairbanks with Anchorage, transporting oil workers, tourists, military personnel, and local residents through some of the most remote wilderness in North America. The train consisted of a diesel-electric locomotive, a baggage car, 4 passenger coaches, and a dining car. On the evening of January 17th, approximately 97 people boarded the train. Many were returning home after work shifts on Alaska's North Slope oil fields. Others were visitors, hoping to see Alaska's winter landscapes. Families occupied several compartments near the rear of the train. Inside the dining car, passengers drank coffee and tea, while snow accumulated on the windows outside. Few paid attention to the worsening weather. The route had operated safely for decades. No one expected anything unusual. Shortly after midnight, the frozen Northern Star approached one of the most isolated sections of track in Alaska. The route passed through Raven Peak Tunnel. Constructed during the 1940s, the tunnel cut directly through a steep mountain ridge and measured approximately 1.6 kilometers in length. The structure was considered old but reliable. Maintenance crews inspected it regularly. At 12:43 a.m., dispatcher Robert Jensen confirmed by radio that the train was approaching the western entrance. Visibility had deteriorated significantly. Snow and ice covered much of the route. The engineer acknowledged the transmission. Then came his final message. Entering Raven Peak now. Nothing unusual appeared in his voice. The train disappeared into the tunnel and was never seen again. 6 minutes later, the eastern checkpoint operator reported no sign of the train. Dispatchers initially assumed a communication failure. Mountain tunnels frequently interrupted radio signals, but 10 minutes passed, then 15. Still, no train emerged. Repeated attempts to contact the locomotive produced only static. At 1:04 a.m., emergency procedures were activated. Maintenance crews stationed near the eastern portal entered the tunnel using inspection vehicles. They expected to find a stalled train. Instead, they encountered something impossible. The tunnel was empty. No locomotive, no passenger cars, no wreckage, no signs of derailment. The rails remained perfectly intact. Investigators searched the entire tunnel several times. There was nowhere for a train to go. Raven Peak Tunnel had only 2 entrances. Both were monitored. Yet the train had vanished. Around 3:20 a.m., investigators discovered the first disturbing clue. Near the center of the tunnel, several unusual footprints were visible in a thin layer of ice covering the maintenance walkway. The prints appeared fresh. Some belonged to adults. Others seemed smaller, possibly children. The tracks led toward a concrete service wall built during tunnel renovations in the 1960s. The footprints ended there. There were no return tracks, no doors, no visible opening, nothing, just solid concrete. Engineers examined the wall carefully. Thermal scanners revealed slight temperature differences beneath the surface. The following day, workers began drilling exploratory holes. Behind the wall, they discovered a sealed maintenance passage, not shown on current railway blueprints. The corridor descended deeper into the mountain. Old wiring and rusted support beams suggested the passage dated back decades. Military markings were visible on several sections of concrete. The discovery immediately attracted federal attention. Within hours, representatives from the Department of Transportation and military officials arrived at the site. Access became restricted. Rumors spread rapidly among local railway workers. Some claimed the hidden corridor connected to wartime military facilities built during World War II. Others believed abandoned supply tunnels extended beneath the mountain. No official explanation was provided. 3 days later, the mystery deepened. A search aircraft flying near the Matanuska Valley spotted something unusual on an abandoned railway branch. The line had originally been constructed by the U.S. Army during World War II to transport supplies to remote military installations. According to official records, the railway had been dismantled in the early 1950s. Yet one passenger coach from the frozen Northern Star sat motionless on the snow-covered tracks. The discovery stunned investigators. The coach appeared undamaged. Its exterior showed only minor scratches and accumulated ice. When search teams entered the carriage, they found a scene frozen in time. Interior lights still glowed. Half-finished cups of tea sat on several tables. A deck of cards remained spread across a seat. Winter coats hung neatly on luggage racks. Most disturbing of all, an old cassette player near the rear compartment continued playing music. The batteries should have died long before. Yet the music continued. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no bodies, no passengers, nothing. Investigators documented every item inside the carriage. Several clocks had stopped at exactly 12:49 a.m., 6 minutes after the train entered the tunnel. The same moment it should have emerged on the opposite side. Meanwhile, excavation teams continued exploring the hidden passage beneath Raven Peak. Approximately 200 meters below the tunnel, workers discovered abandoned rail infrastructure. Narrow-gauge tracks extended into darkness. Several sections appeared relatively modern despite their apparent age. Fresh scrape marks were visible along the steel rails, as if something heavy had passed through recently. Official reports described the structures as remnants of wartime logistics projects, but many investigators privately disagreed. Some claimed the tunnels extended far beyond any known military installation. Others reported hearing distant metallic sounds echoing from deeper underground. The reports were never officially confirmed. Over the following weeks, families demanded answers. Authorities provided none. Passenger records disappeared from several databases. Photographs taken during early stages of the investigation were reportedly confiscated. Journalists attempting to access tunnel blueprints encountered unusual restrictions. Entire sections of historical railway documentation had vanished. In March 1989, the government officially suspended public updates. The case gradually faded from national attention, yet rumors continued. Former workers later claimed additional passenger belongings had been recovered from deeper sections of the underground network. Others alleged that multiple abandoned rail corridors existed beneath the mountain. None of these claims were verified. Decades later, independent researchers developed the most widely accepted theory. According to their reconstruction, Raven Peak concealed an undocumented network of military transport tunnels dating back to World War II. Years of neglect weakened the structures beneath the mountain. When the frozen northern star entered the tunnel, part of the hidden network may have collapsed, redirecting the train into an underground corridor below the main line. Subsequent cave-ins could have sealed the route completely. The isolated passenger coach discovered on the abandoned military branch may have become separated during the event. It remains only a theory. No locomotive was ever recovered. No additional rail cars were found. No passenger was ever located. Today, Raven Peak Tunnel still exists. Trains continue passing through the mountain. Most travelers never realize they are crossing one of Alaska's strangest, unsolved mysteries. And somewhere beneath the frozen wilderness, the rest of the frozen northern star may still remain hidden in the darkness. January 11th, 1976. A passenger train carrying 94 people was traveling through northern Norway during the long Arctic night. The route was routine. The weather was harsh but manageable. Then, shortly after midnight, the driver radioed dispatchers with a strange message. "There's another station ahead, but it shouldn't be here." According to every railway map, there was no station on that section of track. Minutes later, radio contact was lost. Hours later, rescue crews found the train standing on a snow-covered siding deep in the Arctic tundra. The engine was still running. The lights were on. Food remained warm in the dining car. But all 94 passengers and crew had vanished. Years later, investigators uncovered railway maps from the 1930s showing a station that had officially been demolished before World War II. What happened to the Arctic Circle Express remains one of Scandinavia's strangest railway mysteries. January 11th, 1976. Northern Norway was buried beneath one of the harshest winters in recent memory. Above the Arctic Circle, the sun had not risen in weeks. Snowstorms swept across the mountains. Strong winds howled across frozen valleys. Most roads were nearly impassable, but the railway remained operational. For isolated communities scattered throughout the north, trains were often the only reliable connection to the outside world. That evening, Arctic Circle Express number 7 departed Narvik shortly before 9 p.m. Its destination was Bodø. The journey would take several hours through some of the most remote terrain in Scandinavia. The train carried 88 passengers and 6 crew members. Among them were oil workers returning home, university students, military personnel on leave, and several tourists eager to experience the Arctic winter. Inside the train, the atmosphere was calm. Passengers drank coffee. Families played cards. Some watched snow-covered forests pass beyond the frosted windows. Others settled into sleeping compartments for the overnight journey. The locomotive was relatively new. Conductors reported no mechanical concerns. Weather conditions were difficult, but well within operating limits. Nothing suggested the train would soon become part of Norwegian railway history. At 11:43 p.m., Arctic Circle Express passed through the small settlement of Bjornfjell. Dispatchers confirmed everything was operating normally. The next scheduled checkpoint lay nearly 40 kilometers ahead. Between the two locations stretched a remote section of railway, crossing frozen tundra and mountain valleys. Few buildings existed there, fewer people. Only darkness, snow, and endless wilderness. At approximately 12:17 a.m., locomotive engineer Eric Lund contacted railway dispatch. His transmission was routine. Visibility remained poor due to blowing snow. Track conditions were stable. The train continued at reduced speed. Nothing unusual. 20 minutes later, another transmission arrived. This one was different. Lund sounded confused. According to archived dispatch notes, he said, "We have lights ahead." The dispatcher asked him to clarify. Several seconds passed. Then Lund replied, "It looks like a station." The dispatcher immediately checked route maps. There were no stations on that section of track. The next scheduled stop remained more than 30 kilometers away. Assuming Lund had mistaken maintenance lights for a station platform, dispatch instructed him to continue. For nearly a minute, there was silence. Then Lund transmitted again. This would become his final confirmed message. His voice sounded noticeably unsettled. "There's another station ahead." A pause followed. Then, "But it shouldn't be here." The radio fell silent. Dispatchers attempted to respond. No answer. Repeated calls received only static. At first, operators assumed weather interference. Arctic storms often disrupted communications. But as minutes passed, concern began growing. The train never reported reaching the next checkpoint. By 1:05 a.m., emergency procedures were initiated. Attempts to contact the locomotive continued. Nothing. No radio response. No visual confirmation. No emergency signals. The Arctic Circle Express had vanished somewhere in the frozen darkness of northern Norway. At 1:22 a.m., Norwegian State Railways dispatched an emergency inspection locomotive from the nearest maintenance depot. The crew expected to find a disabled train stranded somewhere along the line. A frozen brake system, a signal failure, perhaps a snowdrift blocking the tracks. No one anticipated what they would actually discover. The search continued through worsening weather. Visibility often dropped below 50 meters. Powerful winds pushed walls of snow across the railway. The Arctic landscape seemed completely deserted. At approximately 3:46 a.m., one of the search crews spotted lights in the distance. A train, standing motionless on the tundra. At first, investigators felt relief. The Arctic Circle Express had been found. But that relief vanished within minutes. The train was not on the main line. It sat on a snow-covered siding extending into the wilderness. According to modern railway maps, no siding existed there. Yet the rails were undeniably real, partially buried beneath decades of snow and ice. The Arctic Circle Express stood at the end of the forgotten track. Its engine continued idling. Warm exhaust drifted into the freezing air. Interior lights illuminated every carriage. Nothing appeared damaged. No signs of collision, no derailment, no avalanche, no mechanical failure. The train looked as though it had simply stopped. Investigators cautiously boarded the locomotive. The engineer was gone. So was the assistant engineer. The control cabin remained active. Several switches still occupied their normal operating positions. The throttle remained partially engaged. A fresh cup of coffee sat beside the driver's seat. It was still warm. As search teams moved through the passenger cars, the mystery deepened. Every compartment was empty. Every seat abandoned. Suitcases remained in overhead racks. Coats hung from hooks. Books lay open on tables. Half-finished meals sat untouched in the dining car. A deck of playing cards remained scattered across one table. Several coffee cups still produced faint steam. Passengers had vanished without taking their belongings. It looked as though everyone had disappeared at the exact same moment. One investigator later described the scene as an entire train frozen in the middle of ordinary life. No signs of struggle appeared anywhere. No blood, no damage, no broken windows. Nothing suggested panic. Nothing suggested violence. And yet 94 people were missing. As dawn approached, crews began searching the surrounding area. The weather had calmed slightly. Fresh snow covered much of the tundra. That should have made tracking easy. Instead, investigators found something even stranger. Hundreds of footprints surrounded the train. Men's boots, women's shoes, children's footprints. The tracks led away from the train in multiple directions. But after roughly 60 meters, every trail simply ended. Not faded, not buried, ended, as if the people walking had vanished from the snow itself. The discovery left experienced search and rescue personnel deeply unsettled. Some refused to discuss it publicly for years. Meanwhile, railway engineers focused on a different problem. Where had the siding come from? The track supporting the train did not appear on any active railway map. Survey teams soon confirmed the rails were extremely old. Many sections showed manufacturing marks dating back to the 1920s and 1930s. According to official records, no railway branch had ever existed at that location. Yet investigators were standing on one. A forgotten track had somehow appeared beneath the Arctic Circle Express, and nobody could explain how the train reached it. By sunrise, news of the incident had reached Oslo. Government officials became involved almost immediately. Within hours, police established a security perimeter around the site. Journalists were kept away. Military helicopters arrived shortly after noon. The disappearance of 94 people had become a national emergency. But the greatest discovery was still waiting beneath the snow. Late that afternoon, a railway surveyor named Anders Christensen noticed something unusual several hundred meters beyond the train. A metal sign protruding from a drift. Only its upper edge remained visible. Workers cleared away accumulated snow. What they uncovered sent a chill through everyone present. The sign displayed a station name, a station that should not have existed. The weathered lettering read, Skarvik. None of the investigators had ever heard of it, and according to every modern railway map in Norway, there had never been a station called Skarvik. The discovery of the Skarvik station sign immediately transformed the investigation. Until that moment, authorities believed they were dealing with a railway accident, perhaps an unknown track, perhaps a navigational error. Now investigators faced a completely different question. Why did a station that officially did not exist appear in the middle of the Arctic wilderness? Within 24 hours, historians and railway archivists were brought into the case. Thousands of documents were pulled from storage facilities across Norway. Old engineering plans, construction records, survey maps, photographs dating back decades. At first, nothing appeared. No mention of Skarvik, no station permits, no railway contracts, nothing. Then an archivist in Trondheim made a remarkable discovery. Hidden inside a damaged collection of railway surveys from 1931 was a map of northern Norway. The map showed a small station labeled Skarvik. The station appeared on several documents throughout the early 1930s. Then it disappeared entirely. Records after 1938 made no reference to it. It was as though someone had deliberately erased its existence. The findings stunned investigators. Further research revealed that Skarvik had once served a remote mining settlement operating near the Arctic coast. The settlement itself vanished from records shortly before World War II. Officially, the mine had been abandoned, the station demolished, the track removed. Yet investigators had just found physical evidence proving part of it still existed. The government ordered a detailed survey of the surrounding area. Teams expanded their search several kilometers beyond the train. Most expected to find little more than abandoned railway infrastructure. Instead, they uncovered signs of recent activity. Near the buried platform, search crews found footprints, fresh ones. The impressions appeared only hours old. They led toward a nearby ridge overlooking the valley. Investigators followed them through deep snow. The tracks ended at the entrance of a partially collapsed maintenance building. Inside, they discovered old railway equipment covered in dust, rusty lanterns, signal components, broken telegraph equipment. Most of it appeared untouched for decades, but not all. One oil lantern sat near the doorway. Its metal housing felt warm. The wick showed evidence of recent use. Someone had been there, recently. The discovery generated immediate concern. Police searched the structure thoroughly. No person was found. Yet investigators continued uncovering strange clues. Near the rear wall of the building stood an old station clock. Its glass face was cracked. The hands had stopped at exactly 12:41 a.m. The same time, engineers believed Arctic Circle Express first left the main line. Nearby lay a railway ledger, partially preserved by the cold. Many pages were unreadable, but several entries remained intact. Repeated throughout the book was a name: Station Master Einar Solberg. The final entry had been written in November 1938. It contained only one sentence: the night trains continued to arrive. No further explanation followed. No additional entries appeared. Historians later confirmed that no scheduled trains ever served Skarvik after 1938. The note made no sense. That evening, investigators returned to the abandoned station platform. Powerful floodlights illuminated the snow-covered site. As workers examined the rails, another discovery emerged. The old siding did not end at Skarvik. It continued north, buried beneath decades of snow. Radar equipment revealed several kilometers of track extending into terrain where no railway should have existed. Authorities organized a survey team for the following morning. Before sunrise, however, something happened that would become one of the most controversial moments in the entire case. At approximately 4:17 a.m., two police officers guarding the Arctic Circle Express reported seeing lights moving across the tundra. Not vehicle lights, not flashlights. The lights appeared elevated above the ground, like illuminated railway carriage windows moving through darkness. The officers watched them for nearly 30 seconds. Then they disappeared behind a ridge. Search teams immediately investigated. No vehicles were found, no people, no tracks. only untouched snow stretching toward the horizon. The officers maintained their story for the rest of their lives. Neither ever changed their testimony. The following day, survey teams followed the forgotten rails northward. What they found would force the Norwegian government to intervene directly. Because hidden beneath the snow lay evidence that Skarvik Station had not been abandoned in 1938. Someone had been maintaining parts of it for decades. The forgotten railway continued north for nearly 8 kilometers. Survey crews spent 2 days clearing snow and ice from the buried track. The deeper they traveled into the tundra, the stranger the discoveries became. Sections of rail showed surprisingly little corrosion. Several signal posts remained standing. One semaphore arm still moved when pushed by the wind. It was as though the line had been abandoned yesterday rather than 40 years earlier. Late on January 15th, investigators reached what appeared to be the remains of a larger station complex. Most of the structures had collapsed beneath decades of Arctic winters. Snow covered nearly everything. Yet the layout was unmistakable. Platforms, storage sheds, maintenance buildings, water towers. The place had once handled significant railway traffic, far more than the tiny mining station described in surviving records. Government engineers immediately noticed discrepancies. Official archives portrayed Skarvik as a minor stop, serving fewer than 200 residents. The facilities before them suggested something much larger, something capable of supporting dozens of trains each month. As crews explored the site, they discovered an underground records room beneath the remains of the station office. A steel door protected the chamber from weather. The lock had rusted away decades earlier. Inside, investigators found shelves filled with ledgers. Most were damaged beyond recovery, but several books remained readable. Railway historians began examining them immediately. What they found raised alarming questions. Train arrivals were recorded regularly throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, and even the 1960s. That should have been impossible. According to official Norwegian railway records, Skarvik ceased operations in 1938. Yet someone continued documenting rail traffic for nearly 30 years afterward. Even stranger were the train numbers themselves. Many did not exist. Investigators searched National Railway archives. No matches, no schedules, no registrations. Entire trains appeared in the station logs that had never operated anywhere in Norway. One entry, dated February 1958, listed Train 44A, 73 passengers. Another, from November 1964, recorded Northern Special 19, 58 passengers. No such train had ever been documented. The final entry in the ledger was dated only 6 days before the disappearance of Arctic Circle Express. It read, Northbound arrival confirmed. Expected occupancy, 94. No train number was listed. No departure record followed. The room fell silent as investigators read the entry. 94. Exactly the number of people aboard Arctic Circle Express. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Word of the discovery quickly reached Oslo. The government responded immediately. Within hours, military personnel arrived at the site. Access restrictions expanded. Several sections of the investigation were classified. Officials offered no explanation. The decision only fueled speculation. Meanwhile, another team examined the abandoned platform itself. Near the northern end, workers uncovered a row of benches buried beneath snowdrifts. One bench contained something unexpected: a newspaper, frozen solid beneath layers of ice. The date stunned investigators: January 12, 1976, the day after Arctic Circle Express vanished. The paper should not have been there. No search teams had reached the station until several days later. Someone had apparently visited the platform after the disappearance. Yet no footprints survived. No evidence explained how it arrived. The newspaper contained another disturbing detail. Several pages had been folded around a railway timetable. A single station name had been circled repeatedly in blue ink: Skarvik. Later that evening, survey crews followed the railway beyond the abandoned station. The track entered a narrow valley surrounded by steep cliffs. There, radar equipment detected something beneath the snow. A structure, large, artificial. Excavation began the following morning. Workers expected an old maintenance shed. Instead, they uncovered the entrance to a tunnel. Massive steel doors blocked the opening. The doors bore markings dating to the German occupation of Norway during World War II. No known military records reference the structure. No engineering documents mentioned its existence. Yet the tunnel clearly extended deep into the mountains. More unsettling still, one of the doors stood slightly open. Fresh snow had been disturbed around the entrance. Someone, or something, had entered recently. Investigators prepared to explore the tunnel. Before they could begin, orders arrived directly from Oslo. The site was to be secured immediately. No civilian personnel were permitted inside. For the second time in less than a week, military authorities assumed control of a critical part of the investigation. And from that moment forward, many of the most important discoveries would never appear in the official record. On January 18, 1976, a military engineering unit arrived at the tunnel entrance north of Skarvik. Civilian investigators were ordered to remain outside. Officially, the tunnel was classified as a potentially unstable wartime structure. Unofficially, many suspected authorities had discovered something far more significant. The steel doors were carefully opened. Beyond them stretched a railway tunnel descending into the mountain. The air inside felt unusually warm compared to the Arctic cold outside. Electrical cables ran along the walls. Many appeared decades old. Yet some sections looked surprisingly well maintained. Military personnel advanced cautiously. The tunnel continued for nearly 2 kilometers beneath the mountain. Then it widened into an enormous underground chamber. What they found there would remain classified for years. According to leaked testimony from one engineer, the chamber contained multiple railway sidings. Several tracks disappeared into darkness. Some ended abruptly. Others continued deeper underground. Most astonishing of all were the train cars. Old passenger coaches stood silently on the rails. Some dated to the 1940s. Others appeared newer. Many carried markings from railway companies that no longer existed. Several cars showed signs of having remained untouched for decades. Dust covered the windows. Ice formed along the roofs. Yet none appeared heavily damaged. Investigators moved through them one by one. Most were empty. But inside one carriage, they discovered luggage, clothing, children's toys, personal belongings. Everything appeared abandoned in a hurry. No human remains were found. No explanation accompanied the objects. Then another discovery emerged. Deep within the chamber stood a signal control room. Unlike the abandoned station above, parts of the equipment still functioned. Dim indicator lights glowed behind dusty panels. Power meters registered activity. Someone had maintained the system, or something had continued operating it. Engineers later reported detecting electrical current flowing through portions of the underground network. No external power source could be identified. The mystery deepened further when radio operators established a temporary communications post inside the tunnel. Shortly after midnight, they began receiving strange transmissions. At first, the signals sounded like static. Then voices emerged, weak, distorted, barely understandable. Several operators independently reported hearing railway terminology, train numbers, platform announcements, departure calls. Most appeared incomplete, as if fragments of old conversations were somehow repeating through the system. One recording reportedly contained a phrase that would later become infamous among investigators. Arrival confirmed at Skarvik. The voice sounded calm, professional, routine, yet no such station officially existed. Military commanders ordered all recordings collected immediately. Most were never released. Meanwhile, search teams continued examining the underground rail network. Approximately 4 kilometers beyond the main chamber, workers discovered something unexpected: fresh footprints. The tracks appeared human. They crossed a layer of dust undisturbed for decades. Several investigators photographed them. The footprints led toward a sealed maintenance door. When the door was opened, the team entered a narrow service corridor. At its end stood a small waiting room. Inside were wooden benches, a ticket counter, and a wall clock. The clock had stopped at exactly 12:41 a.m. The same time recorded on the station clock found above. The same time investigators believed Arctic Circle Express first deviated from its route. Pinned to a bulletin board nearby was a railway notice. Its paper appeared remarkably preserved. The date read January 11th, 1976, the day the train disappeared. The notice listed a single arrival: Arctic Circle Express, number 7. Expected occupancy, 94. Several investigators later stated the document appeared freshly printed, not 50 years old, not weathered, fresh, as if it had been posted only hours earlier. The discovery triggered immediate concern among military officials. Within 12 hours, the entire underground complex was sealed. Additional security forces arrived from Oslo. Access restrictions expanded once again. Civilian investigators were removed entirely. Most never returned. The public received almost no information. Officials described the underground structures as abandoned wartime facilities unrelated to the disappearance. Few believed them. Then, 3 weeks later, another development changed everything. A weather station located nearly 30 kilometers north of Skarvik recorded an emergency radio transmission. The signal lasted only 11 seconds. It was weak, broken by interference. Yet technicians managed to isolate part of the message. The voice was male, exhausted, frightened, and according to official transcripts, the final words were, "We found the station. The transmission ended abruptly. No further messages were ever received. The source was never identified, and the search for the missing passengers entered an even darker phase. Throughout the remainder of 1976, the investigation into Arctic Circle Express gradually disappeared from public view. Official statements became increasingly vague. Government representatives insisted that no evidence of foul play had been found. No explanation was offered for the abandoned station. No explanation was offered for the underground railway network. And no explanation was offered for the disappearance of 94 people. Families demanded answers. Few received any. Many relatives later claimed officials discouraged them from speaking publicly. Several journalists investigating the case reported unusual difficulties obtaining records. Requests disappeared. Documents went missing. Witnesses suddenly refused interviews. Bit by bit, the story faded from national headlines. But behind closed doors, the investigation continued. In late 1977, an internal government review examined the underground structures discovered north of Skarvik. The report remained classified for decades. When portions were finally leaked years later, researchers found references to something unexpected. The tunnels beneath the mountain appeared far older than previously believed. Some sections dated back to mining operations before World War I. Others were expanded during the German occupation of Norway between 1940 and 1945. Several passages showed evidence of additional construction during the Cold War. No complete maps existed. Entire sections remained unexplored. According to one engineer, the underground railway system may have stretched for more than 100 kilometers beneath the Arctic wilderness. If true, it represented one of the largest undocumented transportation networks ever discovered in Scandinavia. Yet the most disturbing findings came from the final survey teams. Months after the disappearance, investigators continued receiving unexplained radio signals. Most were weak and fragmented. Many contained nothing but static. A few included voices. Some appeared to be railway announcements. Others sounded like routine conversations between conductors and station staff. One transmission reportedly repeated the same sentence dozens of times. "Track 3 now arriving." Another included what sounded like passengers speaking in the background. The recordings baffled experts. No source could be identified. Several signals appeared to originate from deep beneath the mountains. Then, in March 1978, the transmissions suddenly stopped. They were never heard again. For years, theories multiplied. Some believed Arctic Circle Express accidentally entered the abandoned railway system through a hidden junction buried beneath snow. Others argued that a structural collapse diverted the train onto forgotten tracks, leading into the underground network. A few researchers proposed a far simpler explanation. The passengers may have survived the initial diversion. They may have exited the train while attempting to find help. Disoriented by darkness, tunnels, and severe weather, they could have become lost within the vast underground complex. Subsequent cave-ins might have sealed entire sections of the network forever. It was a tragic theory, but one grounded in reality. Yet even that explanation failed to answer crucial questions. Why was warm food found hours after the disappearance? Why were fresh footprints discovered where nobody should have been? Who maintained electrical systems deep beneath the mountain? And why did station records accurately list the arrival of a train before investigators even knew it had disappeared? In 1989, a retired railway historian made one final discovery. While reviewing forgotten archives in Tromsø, he located a set of railway maps dated 1934. Among them appeared Skarvik Station. Nothing unusual about that, except for one detail. A handwritten note had been added beside the platform. The note was signed by an unknown engineer. It read, "Additional arrivals reported after closure. Cause unknown." No further explanation followed. The historian published the finding. Few people noticed. Today, the Arctic Circle Express remains officially unsolved. The train was recovered. The passengers were not. No confirmed remains have ever been found. No verified survivor has ever come forward. The abandoned station still appears on no modern map. The underground railway system remains largely inaccessible. Harsh Arctic weather and unstable tunnels prevent further exploration. Occasionally, adventurers attempt to locate the site. Most find nothing. A handful claim they discovered fragments of old track emerging from snow-covered hillsides. Others report hearing distant metallic sounds carried across the tundra during the polar night. None have produced definitive evidence. The Arctic wind quickly erases footprints. The snow buries old secrets. And somewhere beneath the mountains of northern Norway, beyond abandoned tunnels and forgotten stations, the final destination of Arctic Circle Express may still remain hidden. Waiting in darkness. Far below the Arctic Circle, at a station that officially never existed. August 14, 1984. A night train carrying tourists, sailors, soldiers, and railway workers left Warsaw for the Baltic coast. At 1:45 a.m., during a violent thunderstorm, the train entered a short tunnel in northern Poland. The tunnel was less than 500 meters long. 2 minutes later, it should have emerged on the other side. It never did. When search teams entered the tunnel, they found empty tracks, no wreckage, no derailment, no passengers. 3 days later, one passenger car was discovered near an abandoned Soviet military testing ground. The lights were still on. Tea remained warm, and every clock inside had stopped at exactly 1:47 a.m. August 14th, 1984. The Baltic Nightliner departed Warsaw Central Station shortly before sunset. The train was one of Poland's most popular overnight services. Its destination was Gdansk on the Baltic coast. Tourists heading for summer holidays filled many of the compartments. Several sailors returning to port occupied another coach. A number of military personnel traveled under official orders. Families, students, and business travelers completed the passenger list. In total, 91 passengers and crew boarded the train. The weather forecast predicted storms across northern Poland. Nobody paid much attention. Summer thunderstorms were common. The Baltic Nightliner had traveled the route hundreds of times. Few expected anything unusual. By midnight, rain lashed the countryside. Lightning illuminated forests and farmland. Strong winds battered the train. Nevertheless, the Nightliner remained on schedule. At 1:41 a.m., the train approached a small forest tunnel near the town of Starogard. The tunnel measured less than 500 meters. Normally, trains passed through it in under 2 minutes. The locomotive entered the tunnel at approximately 1:45 a.m. Several railway workers later confirmed seeing the rear carriage disappear into the darkness. Then the storm intensified. A nearby signal station lost power for several seconds. When electricity returned, the train had not emerged. Dispatchers initially assumed a communication failure. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. No train appeared. Repeated radio calls received no response. The Baltic Nightliner had vanished. Emergency procedures began shortly afterward. Search teams rushed toward the tunnel. No one imagined they were about to uncover one of the strangest railway mysteries in Eastern Europe. Rescue crews arrived shortly before dawn. Expecting a derailment, they entered the tunnel from both sides. The results made no sense. The tunnel was empty, completely empty. The rails remained intact. The concrete walls showed no damage. There was no wreckage, no broken glass, no debris, no sign that a train had ever been there. Investigators searched every meter of the tunnel. Nothing. The surrounding forest was combed by police, railway personnel, and military units. Helicopters joined the search. Dogs tracked scents along the railway corridor. The trail ended at the tunnel entrance, as though the train had simply disappeared. News of the incident spread rapidly across Poland. State authorities attempted to limit media coverage, yet rumors circulated immediately. Some claimed the train had entered a secret military zone. Others believed it had been hijacked. A few insisted the tunnel itself concealed something unknown. For 2 days, investigators found no evidence. Then everything changed. On the morning of the 3rd day, a forestry patrol reported seeing a railway carriage in a remote area nearly 40 kilometers away. The location shocked authorities. No active railway line existed there. A military convoy was dispatched immediately. What they found deepened the mystery even further. The carriage stood alone beside an overgrown section of track. Tall grass surrounded the rails. Trees had begun reclaiming the route decades earlier. According to official maps, no railway existed in that region. Yet the coach was unmistakably part of the Baltic Nightliner. Its exterior showed no major damage. The paint remained intact. The windows were unbroken. The carriage appeared as though it had simply been parked and abandoned. Investigators entered cautiously. Inside, the lights were still on. Electrical systems continued operating despite 3 days without external power. Passengers' belongings remained everywhere. Suitcases occupied luggage racks. Books lay open on tables. Several compartments contained untouched meals. In the dining section, glasses of tea remained warm. Engineers tested the temperature repeatedly. They could not explain the result. Every clock found inside the carriage displayed the same time, 1:47 a.m. Wristwatches, wall clocks, even a battery-powered travel alarm clock. All had stopped simultaneously. No passengers were present, no bodies, no evidence of violence. The carriage was completely empty. Then investigators noticed something outside. Fresh railway tracks extended beyond the coach, tracks that did not appear on any railway map. The rails disappeared into the forest, toward a restricted military area abandoned years earlier by Soviet forces. The mysterious tracks immediately attracted government attention. Military officials arrived within hours. The area surrounding the carriage was sealed. Public access was prohibited. Railway engineers began documenting the unknown line. The rails appeared relatively modern, certainly newer than the abandoned Soviet facilities nearby. Yet no construction records existed. The line curved through dense forest before reaching the perimeter of a former Soviet military testing ground. The base had officially closed in the 1970s. Most buildings stood abandoned. Watchtowers rusted quietly above the trees. Investigators following the tracks discovered something unexpected. Several signal lights remained operational. Electricity still flowed through portions of the forgotten railway. Inside a maintenance shed, workers uncovered technical documents. Most were written in Russian. Many pages had been removed. Only fragments remained. Repeated references appeared throughout the files. Project Sever, Transit Corridor B, Special Movements. Nobody understood what those terms meant. The documents were quickly confiscated by security services. Official statements described them as irrelevant. Few believed that explanation. As the investigation expanded, additional evidence emerged. Several railway workers reported unusual radio transmissions on the night of the disappearance. One dispatcher claimed he heard station announcements from an unknown location. Another described hearing train whistles, despite no trains operating nearby. Communications experts reviewed recordings. Among hours of static, investigators identified a brief fragment of speech. The voice sounded frightened. It said only, "This isn't Gdansk." The source of the transmission could not be determined. Meanwhile, teams continued following the secret railway. The tracks eventually entered a heavily wooded valley. There they discovered an underground entrance concealed behind concrete blast walls. The structure resembled a military installation. Inside lay a network of tunnels extending beneath the forest. Several contained railway lines. Others led toward sealed chambers. One tunnel contained fresh wheel marks. Measurements matched those of the Baltic Nightliner. For the first time, investigators believed they had found the route taken by the missing train. But the tunnel continued far beyond the area they could safely explore. Security officials soon ordered all access restricted. Within weeks, the investigation largely disappeared from public view. Government agencies classified significant portions of the case. The railway carriage was removed. The secret tracks vanished behind military fences. Official reports offered no explanation for the disappearance. The remaining coaches of the Baltic Nightliner were never found. Neither were its passengers. Years later, after the fall of the Soviet bloc, former officials hinted that unusual transportation facilities may have existed beneath northern Poland during the Cold War. None provided evidence. Some researchers believe the train accidentally entered a hidden military railway network unknown to civilian authorities. Others suggest the secret line connected abandoned Soviet installations across the region. It remains the most plausible explanation. Yet major questions remain unanswered. Why did the carriage still have power after 3 days? Why were the drinks still warm? Why did every clock stop at exactly 1:47 a.m.? And what became of the other passengers? Today, portions of the forest near the former testing ground remain off-limits. Local residents occasionally report hearing distant train whistles late at night. Others claim strange lights move between the trees during storms. Most dismiss the stories as folklore. Perhaps they are. But one fact remains. On August 14, 1984, the Baltic Nightliner entered a tunnel less than 500 meters long and somehow never came out.